Hello, Michael here from Small Robot Studio with another Metahumans tutorial. Today we're having a look at how to completely customize your Metahuman head. I'm going to be working from photogrammetry, but if you want to do it from a standard sculpt, you're able to do that as well following this method. This is quite an involved process, so I've chaptered this video so you're able to skip ahead as needed. And if I were you, I would expect to spend a few days minimum working on a project like this. So if you're prepared to put in the time, you can get a pretty good customized sculpt and you'll be able to repeat this workflow relatively easy from here on out.
And hey, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, otherwise you may be missing out on the many tutorials that we're releasing for free each week here on YouTube.
So to begin with, we're here in Maya and we need to take this base geometry out because this topology is required for whatever custom sculpt that you're going to be working off. What we'll be doing is just selecting each piece of geometry and taking it out. So I'm going to take the head, the eyes. At the moment, you'll see that the eye sort of mask shells, I believe they're called, here. I'm not going to be doing these parts, but if you wanted to resize and shape those, that's easy enough to do using the same method, but I'm going to get those eyes there. And I'll also be getting the teeth there as well. Make sure you're exporting the geometry from the rest pose, so that's with no change in any of the controllers. If you've got any change in the controllers, this is going to make the process not work, and you'll get a bad retarget once we do re-import this back into Maya. So ensure you've opened it probably from the original scene from when you import it into Maya. That's the best place to start. So just select your geometry, File, Export Selection. Select your folder to export to and just make sure you give it a good name. So Metahuman head base is what I'm going to call that. The eyes, we do want to do them individually, left and right. We're not going to do the eyelashes. You can do the eyelashes as you want. If you want, you will have to move them around a little bit in ZBrush, but for this tutorial, again, the eyes, the head, and the teeth should be enough to help you understand the process. So I'm going to continue doing what I just did with the eyes, and then the last piece is the mouth. So we'll just open the mouth so I can get it there. I could do it this way, or if you're looking for it in the outliner under Rig, Head, Geometry, we're using LOD 0, and we want to select the teeth geometry. And we can just file export that. The next part of the process is the photogrammetry scan. So I've scanned my own head here, and so in terms of the workflow, import your cameras. I'm only using 35 cameras here, and I'm just going from 180 degrees around the face. So from the extreme left to the extreme right. Don't really need the back so much. It's not super important. It's going to be covered up by hair ultimately anyway. If you've got a bald character and you want that extra sort of reference, then you can do that. So the first thing you do is bring your photos in, and we'll go next. It will generate your cameras, and it's already detected that I've used my phone. So you can see it's just an older Google Pixel, so nothing special in terms of the camera. For the camera orientation, I used human body, and just default is fine. And then run. So you begin with the sparse point cloud, like you can see, and this is the position of the cameras. So I basically was doing 5 or 6 photos, going sort of vertically around in an arc. So roughly, you can see there the blue cameras are the positions of the camera, and then you can see me here. And what you want to do also is make sure that you set the bounding box, otherwise you're going to be wasting time in the processing of the following parts when we go to the dense point cloud. So just make sure that everything else is out of the mesh, out of the scene, like so. And we can see that's just going to crop basically to my body and head. When you are taking the photos, I'd just recommend that you try and maintain the head in the center of the frame. For example, this is my head in the center of the frame. You can see I've got my hair pulled back just to give a little bit more clarity. That's something else I would recommend. If you've got a lot of hair, you might want to use something like Glad Wrap or something like that to keep it matted down nice and flat, or, you know, shave your head. This will help just the scanning process because you don't want to have to be removing too much hair because it's kind of becomes difficult to see where the shape of the skull is. So from the sparse point cloud, all you do is go to Workflow, Advanced, and we're going to do dense point cloud generation. All 50 cameras. 50 cameras is the maximum that you can do on the free version, and that's more than enough, I've found. So what I would recommend doing is starting with just the preview dense point cloud and going up from there. You can do this part of the process as many times as you like. However, it does start to take longer and longer as you go up to more higher densities. So I'm going to skip this process here. I'll show you what it looks like on an already complete one. So you can see this is the dense point cloud, and I've got a couple of different versions going up in density. So the initial there, and then going up to a higher density one and a more high density one, etc. And from that, once you've got your high density point cloud, we're going to go to workflow, advanced, mesh extraction, and we're going to choose which point cloud we want to use. So whichever one that you've generated in that process, you can choose to reference to create your mesh, and then we'll just go through to next. And again, you can go through and do this in steps. So you can do from the preview and go all the way up to ultra and see which you get the best result with. Once you've done that, you'll have a couple of meshes. So here's the low quality one, and here is the higher quality one. We didn't get actually a whole lot of difference there. You can see I'm wearing my headband to keep my hair back. And so this is going to be relatively fine. You can see there's some artifacts there on the nose and a little bit of weird stuff happening on the forehead, but generally I'm getting a lot of the shape that I need for this scan. Things that I really want to be able to get are the ears, because they can become kind of complex to sculpt. The overall jawline, if I didn't have facial hair, that would make it a lot easier. Shape of the lips and nose, so good silhouettes there, and the depth of the eyes, and that's very important because that is something that you will see that is off if you're not getting this three-dimensional depth in your sculpt. So with that completed, the final step is to create a textured mesh. So we go to workflow, textured mesh generation, select the mesh that you want to use to generate your textured mesh, go through next, and again, what I would do is just probably high details for this one, and the default presets otherwise fine, and we'll just go on to next and generate that. And so finally, this is what the textured mesh looks like. It's pretty good in the end there. We obviously don't need the texture at this stage. We'll be doing texturing on a separate tutorial, but this is the final scan. And I used both Autodesk's, I can't remember what it's called, and Meshroom, and I found Zephyr just to give the best result overall, the cleanest mesh and the cleanest scan using the exact same photo. So I would recommend using Zephyr if you're going to be doing this process. So finally, we just need to export the textured mesh. We want to select the mesh that you've got. I've only got the one there, and we want to export it as an OBJ. We can just export a single texture. We don't need more than that. And we do not want to scale the texture. This is fine. You can if you want, it doesn't really matter. It may help you in the sculpting process, but I'm just going to ignore that step for now. From there, I just exported it to my ZBrush directory, so I could easily find it and import it in to my ZBrush project. The next step is importing our models and our scan into ZBrush. So we're just going to, with a fresh scene here, import our Metahuman base. And the most important thing here is to not rotate or move this Metahuman base. This is going to be on the relative world center. So keep this orientation, don't rotate it, otherwise we're going to have issues. We also want to bring in the rest of the geometry. So just append and select the new subtool and import all the other pieces. So that's going to be your eyes and your teeth. And you should have something that looks like this with the teeth also there. You can put these in a handy little folder if you like, or keep them separate. The next part is bringing in the scan, and you'll see that the scan is actually coming very small. So I'm just going to position that. Now this part, if we just set everything else to be transparent, is important. We do want to get the scale roughly correct here. Because you don't want to put your head onto a body and then the head be very large relative to the size of the body. Also, we want to go through and delete all the extra pieces that we don't want. Basically, all I want is from the neck down. So I'm just going to use Control, Shift, and Alt and cut out that, and also cut out all this stuff at the back. And I'll solo that so we can see a little bit better. That's fine, and that's fine. We can go through and cut all that stuff out as well. I'm going to delete hidden. I'm using a custom interface here, and because I've been using this interface for so long, I actually don't remember where delete hidden is, so you'll have to search that yourself if you are unfamiliar. Now I'm going to set this to orthographic, and I'm going to continue to position this. So you can see that my head has got a slight rotation to it, so we'll want to fix that, and also around the Y a little bit, or around the Z as it were. And when you're scaling, I would try and position the mesh so you've got a point to scale from, and I'm just going to scale it from the bottom of the chin here, and that'll just make it easier to find that scale correctly. Just reset those rotations and continue to line it up. Now I'm going to sculpt this mesh in asymmetry, so the left and the right side will not be symmetrical because a human head is not symmetrical, unfortunately, and this is going to make it a lot harder. For your first one, maybe do it as a symmetrical sculpt, and that will be a lot simpler for you. However, if you want to do it asymmetrical, that's what I did, and it will work for this process, so just in case you were wondering. So just going backwards and forwards here, seeing that it's relatively the same size and that the rotation doesn't need to be adjusted. It does appear to need to be adjusted. I can use the gizmo here to see if I run out the center of the nose there, it's not quite centered. So we're just going to continue to try and make that as straight as possible. Also straight across the eyes, that looks pretty good, and the mouth, that looks pretty good as well. Probably needs to be rotated around the Y. If I'm just looking at the ears, that's probably about as good as I can get it. Do take some time to get this correct, otherwise it will make the rest of the process in sculpting quite difficult. But just ensuring that some of your major landmarks roughly line up. So the nose, the bottom of the chin and the ears and the eyes, if they're roughly in the same position, the top of the head to the bottom of the chin, that will pretty much sort you out. So you can see that's kind of what I'm looking at there. Now in terms of cleanup, all I really worked with when I did this was clay buildup and Sculptress. So Sculptress is good because it's generally, when you're smoothing, going to retain the overall silhouette, which is important. You can see the scan's actually done a reasonably good job here. The main thing I need to get rid of is all my hair. So I would just start mainly with the sideburns and the beard. If you are using someone that doesn't have facial hair, then that's going to be a lot easier for you. But just trying to get rid of that as you can. And the thing about the sculpt, or the thing about the scan, if I put in perspective, is that it's, even though it's in perspective, it is actually quite orthographic looking. And this is just a semi-limitation of the photogrammetry, as it does tend to make these look a little bit orthographic from certain perspectives. So what I would recommend doing is going through and just building some of the volumes back in to places like the cheekbones there, and just keep it nice and loose at this stage, because we're going to be doing a lot of editing later on and ZRemeshing, so the detail at this point is not super important. So just clean up the mesh as best you can, getting rid of the beard and doing a little bit of smoothing, but it doesn't have to be super smooth at this point. So this is where I've gotten it to. You can still see it's a bit rough here, but I've just sort of maintained the forms as best as I can and kept it looking like me as best as I can as well. You can see it's pretty rough still around the eyes and things like that, but the main thing we do want to maintain is the volume. I cannot stress that enough. Keep those volumes up. I've still got to clean up the back of the ears and stuff, and the back of the head, all that's fine. We will get to that later, but once you get it looking like this is pretty much where you need to be. Something I do like to do is have the original scan just offset as well, just so I can reference it every now and then and make sure that I'm not going too far off, and as I am creating the extra volumes, that I'm not making it too voluminous. I would err on the side of making it too much volume rather than not enough, because it's easier to chip away at it a little bit rather than build it back up. The main brushes that I've used here are just clay buildup, dam standard, and inflate. That's literally all I'm doing, nothing special. You're dam standard for getting in some of those creasing. Also, if you need to refine the edges of the lips, I find that using the inverted dam standard, so Alt, and just bringing in the shapes of the lips, things like that can be quite good. The eyes are going to be the next thing. We need to position the eyeball so we can actually continue to sculpt on the eyelids and get that looking correct. And we want to make sure that we're getting this epicanthic fold as good as possible, because that is part of the base mesh here. If we have a look, you can see how much of that fold is visible there, and we want to sort of get something with a similar amount of depth there. In terms of aligning the eyeballs, what I would recommend doing is having transparency on so you can see the eye inside the head. And the other thing is the scale. So the scale of the eyeball should be roughly 5 widths of the eye across the head. And you also want to use your reference to see how the eye protrudes along the side of your head. So if I turn transparency off, if I have a look at my reference here, so I just want to make sure that that eye is curving in and slightly downward. So the roughly the curvature starts just below the top eyelid and then curves inward. That looks about right actually where it is, but it is a bit small. If we turn transparency back on here, something you can do is just create a copy, move it across, and you can see that's not going to touch the other eye. So we can scale that up a bit and get it to roughly the correct size. That looks about right. May need to be a little bit more that way. And possibly back in the head just a touch. That's looking pretty good. So now we can go in and start sculpting the head a little bit more. But ideally, and you can see I'm just working with the left eye here, ideally both eyes would be in. What I recommend doing is just duplicating the one eyeball and renaming this. And originally we did bring in both eyeballs, but I think it's actually better just to have a duplicate of one once you get it lined up. So they should be roughly on the same horizontal axis, or they generally, I would say, be on the same horizontal axis, even though that might not be technically exactly correct all the time. But this will make it just generally easier for you to sculpt. So you can see I've got those both there. Now the UVs are not going to be correct now, but we can copy the UVs from our original eyeballs onto these eyeballs because topologically they are the same. So they should have 770 points each. So now that those are in, we will just go in and continue to smooth out using Sculptress, because we're going to get a little bit more detail back in, and building up the volumes of the eyelid. You can use inflate around the eyelids, and ensure you look at your mesh. Eyelids are actually quite thick, and that's nowhere near thick enough as it is. Probably something closer to that. So you can see here, I've continued to go through and clean up the sculpt a little bit, got in behind the ears there and created that separation. I also got rid of the hair and replaced it with just a really simplified geometry for the hair. I just found that it helps me see the likeness a little bit better. Likeness sculpting, and generally sculpting, is not my specialty. It is just something I'm doing for the sake of this. If you want to know more about sculpting, you need to check out my wife's tutorials. She has a whole course on sculpting likeness if you would like to do something like that. And the other thing that is currently missing is the shoulders. So if I go back to my head here, you can see I don't have the shoulders, and the shoulders are pretty easy to do. What we want to do here is just duplicate our base mesh, and we're going to delete everything but the shoulders. So we just delete hidden, and then we move this down and take our scan and merge it down. So then we have that, and that has lined up roughly correct. Make sure that the shoulders and the head do line up nicely. You don't want the head sitting very high on the shoulders or vice versa. At this point, then, it is just a matter of connecting the shoulder and the head back in. Just use topological there. You could also group this so they are separate. I just want them intersecting for now. It doesn't have to look exactly right, just so they're overlapping, because I'm just going to get in here and sculpt the transition between the two. This is fine. So we will then go to geometry and we will dynamesh that together and just try and maintain roughly the same poly count, obviously plus the shoulders, so maybe 500 for this one. That's fine. So we can just go in. And I've got Sculptress on, so I don't get a whole lot of extra topology. And just sculpt this back pretty loose, but hitting your forms of the neck and the shoulders, etc. You'll notice at the bottom has been closed. We will get rid of that later on before we export. So just bear that in mind. Don't stress about that just at this point, however. In terms of doing the mouth bag, what I would recommend doing is appending a cube, and I'm just going to bring that up so it's underneath the mouth, underneath the base, and we want to be able to see both of these meshes, and I'll turn it on to transparent. So I'll go to my Metahuman base actually to begin with, and I just want to be able to see the height and the width of that, and from the back as well. So now I can sort of see it from all angles, and this will just help me get the relative shape for this to begin with. And I'll just do this in orthographic because it is basically symmetrical in the Metahuman. We can just use symmetry here. And to begin with, it's not an exact science, just getting it relatively to the correct shape. Okay, something like that. It's worth noting at this point the relative distance of the mouth bag from the front of the lips. A couple of things that I would point out is that the top of the mouth bag roughly aligns with the bottom of the nose, and the bottom of the mouth bag roughly aligns with where the chin begins. And because we're going to be sizing this to our own sculpt, it is worth knowing where those landmarks sort of occur. So you can see our mouth bag here intersects my head a little bit because my head's a little bit narrower, it appears. The top is roughly correct. It might need to be a touch lower. Bottom of the chin, that seems about right. So we're going to keep that in position for the moment. And the next thing we want to do is set the teeth into place, because the shape of the mouth bag is a lot to do with where the teeth are. So again, if we look at the relative position of the teeth and the mouth bag, you can see that the top of the teeth there and the bottom of the teeth just slightly intersect the mouth bag, and the front teeth are just barely sitting on that lip line there. So that's sort of worth looking at there. And in terms of the width, they sort of fit fairly snugly to the mouth bag. So let's combine those with our mouth bag. So we'll begin by just scaling that in a bit, and we will ultimately need to scale the teeth a little bit to fit, but this is fine to begin with. We'll probably need to move those back a touch and scale them, and just generally make sure that fits, so we can bring our mesh back in to get a better idea of that. So you can see here the bottom lip is not quite in the right position for the teeth, so the teeth need a bit higher, just about there, and we're looking at that relative distance from the front lip to the teeth there as well. The teeth sort of start at the edge of where the lip is, at the very the corner of where those lips are there, so that's a pretty good landmark to be looking at. So then let's look again at our mouth bag and just ensure that that is going to cover us. Yep. So then we just need to go in and continue to move and scale the mouth bag to fit and suit the teeth. So once the mouth bag is complete, I'm going to do a ZRemesh, and the reason for that is we do want to pull a piece of it out through the lips there, because we're going to create a boolean from it. So ZRemesh, and actually what we're going to do is turn on symmetry here, ZRemesh, and we'll just get a slightly better result. And we just want some fairly small row of polygons that we can use to extract through, and this is looking not too bad. We just want to make sure that the line sort of follows through. Making this adjustment is not going to be a big deal. Just make sure that we're not now intersecting the head at any position. So once that's done, we want to get to this row of polygons. So I'm going to use ZModeler, BZM, and I'm going to create a temporary polygroup, just holding down Alt and tracing through that. And then we can just Q-mesh out like that. So it looks like we've got a little wafer sort of coming through the lips there, and that's going to work pretty nicely. and I'm just going to also add some subdivisions there. So insert multiple edge loops. We'll just do this. We're going to turn on backface masking as well, and we'll just do a little bit of smoothing like so, and we just want to go through with the move tool and ensure that we're getting to the edge of the lips and roughly following the shape of the lips like so. So it should look something like this, and as long as we've got enough width here, it doesn't have to be huge, but we do actually want to be able to see the space between the lips. It will make our job a lot easier. So let's go into the outliner here. I'm just going to move the head and the mouth bag boolean to the bottom here, and we're going to set this to be a boolean start, and that's going to be a subtraction. And then if I turn on live boolean, you can see where it's going to be, so I might need to make some adjustments here. Okay, that's better. That's kind of getting to where the edge of the lips are, and we can still go through and use the move tool there. If I hit Shift F, I can actually see where it is, and that just can be lined up as you need. Once the boolean is created, we can create a boolean object from it. So we just go to boolean and select our mesh, make boolean mesh, and we can just append the new mesh in. So now we can get rid of the old ones, and we've got this new one here, and we'll put it back in our group. And if I hide half the mesh, you'll see that the mouth bag works nicely. So at the moment we've still got a little bit of separation, but we don't want to close it just yet. So now we want to do a ZRemesh and get it down a little bit lower. And the reason I want to do this is because the topology doesn't really follow any of the actual topology of the face. And it's my preference to work from low to high. Some people work from high down, and that's fine, but just generally I find it easier to sculpt when the topology follows and I'm at a lower resolution. So I've already drawn in some ZRemesh guides. This is all I really need, and these are the parts that I really want to hit, because I do need really solid topology around the eyes, particularly again the epicanthic fold. That's where this little sort of bit of fat rolls over the eyelids. It will depend on your ethnicity as to how prevalent this is. Now, so we can just ZRemesh, probably targeting about 100,000 polys. I'm just going to set it to half and adapt, and if we ZRemesh that, we will get this result. So you see now we should get some relatively good poly loops around the eye, and that's what I'm really looking for here on both sides, as well as the poly loop or a nice edge loop that follows where the fold is. And then I can just go back in with my damp standard and create a nice crease back in there, following that up with a bit of inflation. And this fold, we do want it to be, again, very deep. If we look at our base mesh, you can see how deep it is there. So that's sort of what we're targeting. And we do also want to get roughly this width in our eyelids. So we want to go back into our mesh and make sure that we are using something like damp standard, going along the edges of the eyelids like so, and just bring them out. Do make sure that you can see the transition between the eyelid and the inner eye. The inner eye is not super important in terms of what's actually happening there, just as long as it's indented and clear between the eyelids and the eye. This will make the Z-wrapping process a little bit simpler for you. This is a good opportunity to go through and improve the quality of the lips with some smooth and again some damp standard in there to get the crease that you need. Okay, at this point you can see I've pretty much cleaned up the mesh in low poly, and the last thing that we want to do before we wrap is get rid of this lower part of the mesh, and that can be easily done by going to poly groups, and I'm just going to group front, and you'll see that groups that side there, and I can just Control Shift click on it and then isolate it so it's just by itself there. Invert the visibility and delete hidden. So we should just end up with something that's roughly the same as what our Metahuman base was. At this point you can see I've closed the lips. It's easily done by using a mask lasso and just masking off one lip and using the move brush with topological on to be able to shift one or the other. Now I would recommend doing this in multi-resolution, so you can go up and down through the levels and just get in there and move those so they're nice and close together. I probably would avoid having too much overlap, although I haven't had any issues with mine. I think that if you did have some overlap, I think it could be a problem during the Zwrap process. So just get them as close as possible. If we need to do some adjustments in Maya, which gives us a little bit better control per vertex, we can do that as well. So it's not a problem if it's not perfect here. So once you've got your high poly sculpt and you're happy with it, all the stuff is there, we're going to wrap the Metahuman base. So we have that topology, but it looks like our scan. So I need to bring both of those up to the top. I want the Metahuman base as the top subtool, and I want the sculpt as the second subtool, and we'll just make everything else invisible. And then we're going to use Zwrap, and Zwrap is a plugin. It has a 30-day trial if you just want to try this. I do highly recommend the plugin. It's for what you pay for it. I think it's incredible what it can do in terms of retargeting topology onto a base mesh. It's going to save you so much retopologizing, which is always good. So with those selected, we're just going to go back up to our base mesh here, and we're just going to hit start Zwrap. So if you are using symmetry, a couple of things, sync views, just going to make this process a lot easier to be able to see what's happening on both sides. Also, if you have symmetry, you want to set symmetry on for both, so you can see if I put points in there and put points in there, it's going to do it on both. This is non-symmetrical though, so this process is actually going to take a little bit longer. I would say probably about half an hour to get this done. The main parts that you want to hit are, we're going into the eyes here. Just make sure we're getting the inside of the eye there. And what I do is work left side and right side, and just ensure that you've got one and then one. You might want to say it in your head as you're doing it, 2 and then 2, and really get up inside the epicanthic fold. Hit your main landmarks for your eyeballs. So for example, the center, and then the center, and then the top of the outside of the eyelid and the outside of the eyelid. Look at the position relatively of the points. That will help. I haven't done a lot of Zwrap, so if you've got tips, please leave them in the comments. I've managed to get this to work okay from what I've been able to do, but I'm just going to put a sped up process here. I might put it as a separate video without any commentary if you just want to look at exactly what I did. But again, it's not super scientific what I've done, because I've only done this a few times. So you can see here at this point now, I'm just going through to the next stage button at the bottom right, where you can click wrapping, and I'm just about to start the Zwrap process. This will probably take a few minutes to do it. I've sped this up obviously. Before you do this, just make sure you hit save, and save a text file for the left and the right side. There's a save for each window. And also look at where it saves. If you start the wrapping process, my understanding is that it deletes the text files, and the text files are the position of all the points you put down, and it takes a long time to do, as you may already be familiar with if you're doing this. So make sure you copy those out of the directory in which they are and paste them somewhere temporarily once you've saved them before you start the wrapping process. If I'm wrong about this, please let me know, but after wrapping, those text files disappeared for me, so I just don't want you guys to have to go through the long process of doing this twice. So here's the completed wrap. The only one area of issues that I had was just on the ear here. So I'm just going through and I'm smoothing that back out, and I'll just use a bit of the move tool, a bit of inflate to bring out the volume again. And you'll probably have to go through a couple of other areas of the mesh as well, and just ensure that those areas are smooth. There might be the odd vertice that is like sort of like got a bit of a kink in it. So just make sure that your poly loops are nice and smooth as you'd expect them to be. And try not to over smooth and lose your volume. So bring back any volume in that you do lose. At this point, you still can adjust the mesh. It's okay to, because this will still be your target mesh. The topology is correct though. So do not add any topology after this point, and you'll be okay. So once the wrapping process is complete, this is the original Metahuman and this is me. And you can see that the topology is shared and is the same once I've done that cleanup. So this is basically what we're looking for here. And you'll notice that we've lost a bit of the resolution. Obviously, we're working with only 25,000 points. We can recover the high poly normal maps, but I'm going to do that in a separate video. So if you're not subscribed, make sure you are subscribed. You can look forward to that in the future. So now at this point, we just want to go through and export all of our geometry. That's going to be the head, the eyes, and the teeth. So simple, select your geometry, export it to the directory that you've been working on for your Metahuman in Maya. So I'm just going to be putting it in here. In terms of the eyes, if you have got the left and the right and you just did a mirror and you want to get the UVs back, you can just take the UVs from the original one, go to UV master, go to copy UVs, and then you can select the repositioned one and then just paste UVs, and that will have the UVs there again, as you can see. So back in Maya, time to bring all the geometry back in, and something I point out at this point, we're going to need another version of the original non-deformed head. So this is the rigged one. I can't just duplicate this because it's going to have references, so I am actually just going to re-import it. That's the best way I've found to do it. Quickest way to import is to just go to Windows Explorer and just drag in. So we're going to get our Metahuman base and our sculpt. So we can reposition these in the scene, it doesn't matter. We just do not want to reposition the vertices. So that is to say we don't want to go to vertex and do any sort of transformation there because that will change the blend shape. And we can offset this as well. So what we've got here is the original rigged mesh. We've got the base, which is not rigged, and then we've got the target. And what we do is we select our rigged mesh, our base mesh without any rigging in it, and then our target. And we can go to deform and blend shape. I'm just going to use the default, create. And you'll see on the right hand side here in the channel box editor, we've got a blend shape node. We're going to set the head LOD0 1, which is just this top one of the two inputs there, below envelope, to 1. And you'll see that changes the target mesh. We're going to deselect everything, reselect the head, go back to that blend shape node and set the lower of the 3 to -1. It's going to give us the delta. So what that means is now that this head and this head are going to be moving together. So if I do this, you see we get both. So what I would then do is we can just hide the visibility of our Metahuman, and we'll just go set this translate 0, and that should line up nicely. So we do want to go through and repeat these steps with our eyes and teeth. So just as one final example, this is going to be the right eye that I'm going to do here. So I select the eye, and I select the base mesh, and then I select the sculpted eye, which is going to be in the correct position. And we go to deform, blend shape, go to the blend shape, select the first input, set that to 1, deselect everything, reselect the target mesh, select the input, and select this, set this to -1. So if I reposition this now, you'll see that that lines up nicely. And we can move the eye around and you'll see that that deforms correctly. And you can see that this Z target's done a pretty good job, but there's some slight issues just in the topology around the epicanthic fold. And that's because my epicanthic fold is slightly different than what the base mesh was. So the closer you get your base mesh, the better this is going to look for you and the easier it should theoretically be. So you may be wondering why not just select the sculpt and select the base mesh and create a blend shape. When you do that without the delta, what you'll find happens is you'll get weird offsets, particularly in the eyes. You'll find that they start to come out through the mesh. We need that delta. So you can see this in action. I've just applied this to a rig with animation on it from one of the previous tutorials, and you can see that it looks pretty good. So still, again, probably need some work on the eyes, and there are some areas around the chin because of my chin basically non-existent, being non-existent, like I'm a character from Bob's Burgers, it doesn't really line up as well with the Metahuman chin. So I would want to go in and just make a little bit of alterations there perhaps. But generally, I think I'm pretty happy with this. And hopefully this walkthrough is good enough to be able to get you guys on track. I know it's a lot of processes, and if you made it to the end, congratulations. And if you found it useful, please leave a like. This was an incredible amount of work to put together. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.
That's it for this tutorial. If you found it useful, make sure you leave a like so other people can find it. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, as we're bringing out CG and illustration tutorials every week, just like this one. Become a patron and access tutorial assets, bonus content, a private Discord, and more by clicking the link below.